Imagine waking up in 2025 and hearing Jim Jones. Yes, K. Ballin' Jim Jones standing 10 toes down and declaring with a straight face that he's better than Nas. Nas, Mr. Illmatic, the poet laureate of Queensbridge. It's the man who made one. Mike Nye's state of mind and basically gave half your favorite rappers a blueprint to even pick up a pen. Oh. And Jim said he's better. Oh, but he didn't stop there. No. K doubled down. He tripled down. K basically said Nas is washed, irrelevant, and wait for it, his own son doesn't even know who Nas is now. Hold on. Did Jim Jones just disrespect one of the greatest rappers of all time and drag his child into it for backup? Somebody cue Maury Povich, because the lie detector test determined that was cap. But folks, it gets crazier. Because what started as one viral clip from a random podcast has now exploded into one of the most ridiculous, hilarious, and downright delusional rap beefs of the decade. And trust me, you are not ready for what comes next. In the world of hip-hop scandals, there are controversies that make you shake your head. And then there are controversies that make you question reality itself. And Jim Jones declaring himself better than Nas falls directly into the second category. It all started as one of those random podcast clips that get thrown into the internet. Void every other week, but this one hit differently. The guest was a young fan from Atlanta who boldly claimed Jim Jones was more relevant than Nas, and within hours the clip started snowballing across TikTok, YouTube, and Twitter. It was funny at first, almost laughable. But Jim Jones himself saw the viral spark, and instead of letting it die down, he poured gasoline on the flames. He appeared on multiple podcasts, sat across from Fat Joe and Jadakiss, and proudly stated with his chest that not only was he better than Nas, but also more relevant, more viral, and more impactful in 2025 than the Queensbridge legend had ever been. According to Jim, he had the Billboard numbers, the streaming power, and the cultural relevance to back up his claim. He even dragged his own son into the debate, saying his child could not name a single Nas record, and that was somehow proof that Nas had lost his relevance. It was absurd, but it was also captivating because people could not believe the audacity. To really understand how wild this was, you have to step back and remember who we are talking about. Nasir Jones is not some passing name in hip-hop. He is the author of Illmatic, Stillmatic, God's Son, and countless classics that changed rap forever. His lyrical ability, storytelling, and influence are the stuff of textbooks. He went toe-to-toe with Jay-Z in one of the most legendary rap beefs of all time, and walked away with a track like Ether, which fans still quote decades later. Beyond music, Nas became a successful businessman, invested in tech companies, and even won a Grammy after years of being overlooked. He is solidified as a cultural icon, someone whose presence goes far beyond chart positions. Yet here was Jim Jones standing tall and saying he was bigger, he was better, he was more important, and he was more relevant. The comparison alone felt ridiculous, and that is why it went viral so quickly. The internet's reaction was instant and brutal. Twitter lit up with jokes, memes, and threads. One user wrote that comparing Jim Jones to Nas was like comparing fast food to fine dining. Another said the only thing Jim had over Nas was more Instagram live rants. Memes showed Nas as a king, on a throne while Jim tried climbing up with a broken ladder. Even Dipset fans who respected Jim had to admit the take was delusional. But while fans laughed and mocked him, Jim smiled. Because deep down he knew this was the reaction he wanted. He had figured out the formula: say something outrageous, watch the internet explode, and then let the curiosity funnel people back to his music catalog. In today's cloud economy, attention is currency, and Jim was cashing out. The thing is, this was not a random accident. Jim has a long history of pushing narratives for attention. Over the years, he has thrown shots in interviews, downplayed legends, and positioned himself as the underdog who gets overlooked. Back in the 2000s, when Cameron had issues with Nas, it was Jim who stood by his side, echoing the insults and inheriting the beef by association. He has always played the role of the loud soldier ready to step into battles. But this time it felt less about loyalty and more about engineering a viral moment. He even told Angie Martinez later that he knows how to flip negativity into revenue, admitting outright that everything viral becomes digital and digital turns into streams. In his own words, whether people love him or hate him, he is one click away from making money. That is the mindset that fueled his bold Nas comments. But once you touch a legend's name, especially someone like Nas, you unleash a different kind of storm. Nas may have stayed silent in the beginning, letting the noise swirl around him, but his fans did not hold back. These are the same loyalists who still debate Jay-Z versus Nas like it happened yesterday, who know every line of Illmatic by heart, and who see Nas as untouchable royalty. They flooded Jim's comments with insults. They made threads tearing down his arguments. And they relentlessly reminded him that Bailin might have been a moment, but Nas built a career that shaped the entire genre. One brutal comment read that Jim Jones was checking his legacy temperature with the wrong thermometer. Others mocked the idea that his son not knowing Nas proved anything, saying it was the equivalent of a teenager not knowing who Shakespeare was. The ridicule kept piling on, but Jim seemed to embrace it, going back on podcasts to double down and call for comparisons of Billboard Hot 100 entries between himself and Nas, as if the numbers would settle the debate. And then came the moment that turned the internet upside down. A leaked Raekwon track surfaced with an alternate verse from Nas where he rapped, "If the shoe fits, this is for you." It was vague, but fans immediately connected the dots and assumed the bar was aimed directly at Jim Jones. Suddenly, the silence broke. Nas had not mentioned Jim's name, but that one line was enough to send speculation into overdrive. Social media exploded again, debates flared up, and people started wondering if we were about to witness a new lyrical battle. Jim, of course, jumped at the chance, insisting he was ready to go bar for bar, even pulling out large stacks of cash on camera and daring Nas or anyone from his era to take him on. But while Jim chased the clout, Nas maintained his calm, allowing his fans to do the fighting for him. The stage was set for chaos, and the scandal was no longer just about a wild podcast comment, but about whether Jim had just poked a sleeping giant and what the fallout would look like. The scandal did not cool down after Jim Jones doubled down on his claim, but instead took on a new life of its own as social media platforms, blogs, and even mainstream news outlets picked up the story and spun it into the headline of the month. Everywhere you turned, there were debates, reaction videos, and endless commentary about whether Jim Jones had finally lost his mind or whether he was simply playing the game smarter than anyone else. Anonymous sources claiming to be close to Jim leaked supposed inside information that his team had been deliberately pushing this narrative for weeks, waiting for the right viral clip to blow it up. Screenshots floated around Twitter that allegedly showed Jim's manager encouraging him to provoke Nas because the fanbase outrage would bring the streams. Whether those leaks were authentic or not did not even matter, because in the court of public opinion, the damage was already done. People believed Jim had manufactured the entire scandal to sell himself as relevant in an era where clout equals cash. The narrative painted him as a desperate artist clinging to the limelight, and that perception spread like wildfire. Adding fuel to the flames were fabricated investigative reports that began circulating online describing Jim's supposed lavish spending habits and questionable business moves. According to one viral blog post, Jim was funneling money from Dipset reunion tours into bizarre investments ranging from luxury sneakers, warehouses, to nightclubs that mysteriously shut down after 6 months. Another unverified article claimed he had blown nearly $500,000 on jewelry in a single weekend, only to pawn it later to cover losses from a failed crypto scheme. Whether these details were real or just internet exaggerations was irrelevant, because the more outrageous the claim, the faster it spread. Fans loved the idea of tying his Nas comments to a broader narrative of recklessness and delusion. The reactions were not just coming from fans. Industry insiders began to weigh in with their own takes. Some siding with Nas and others, playing devil's advocate for Jim. A producer who once worked with both artists allegedly told a hip-hop magazine that Jim always had a chip on his shoulder when it came to legends, feeling overlooked and underappreciated. According to this anonymous source, Jim believed he had never gotten the respect he deserved for shaping street fashion, for pushing mixtape culture, and for keeping Dipset relevant in the mid-2000s. The source claimed Jim's outbursts were not just about Nas, but about years of pent-up frustration with the way history remembers him. On the other hand, an unnamed A&R reportedly dismissed Jim's comments as pure trolling, and said flat out that the only reason anyone was talking about him was because he had found a way to bait Nas's massive fan base into giving him free publicity. Public opinion became even more divided when alleged leaked audio emerged of a heated phone call between two label executives joking about Jim's claims. In the clip, one executive supposedly laughs and says, "All Jim has to do is keep talking crazy, because every tweet adds up to another Spotify play." The other executive responds by saying that as long as Jim keeps stirring controversy, he will never be completely irrelevant. These so-called leaks may or may not have been authentic, but they added layers of intrigue to the scandal and kept audiences hooked, as if they were watching a reality show unfold in real time. Meanwhile, Nas continued his silence, which only amplified the noise. Every day he remained quiet. Fans speculated about what he was thinking and whether he would eventually respond with a diss track. Some claimed he was above it all and did not need to engage. Others insisted he was cooking something up in the studio and waiting for the perfect moment to drop a nuke on Jim. The uncertainty kept fans glued to the story. And then came the tipping point when Jim appeared on Club Shay Shay with Shannon Sharpe and was asked directly if he was drunk when he claimed he was better than Nas. Jim laughed off the question, but once again stood by his words. He did clarify that he was not saying he was more lyrical than Nas, but insisted he was more relevant, more viral, and more impactful to the younger generation. He even pulled out hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash during the interview, daring any rapper, including Nas, to face him in a battle for money and pride. It was half circus act and half desperate plea for attention, but it worked because clips from that interview went viral instantly. The backlash, though, was relentless. Fans swarmed his comment sections with jokes and insults. One viral post read that Jim Jones comparing himself to Nas was like a man comparing a water pistol to an egg. It's 47. Another said if Jim was more relevant than Nas, then reality television was more important than literature. The memes grew harsher each day, with TikTok edits portraying Jim as a clown at a circus and Nas as the unbothered king sitting in his palace. It was brutal, but Jim seemed to lean into it. Bragging that negativity only made him trend harder. Behind the scenes, however, whispers began to circulate that not everyone in Jim's camp was happy with the strategy. Some insiders claimed his Dipset brothers were quietly distancing themselves from the controversy, not wanting to be dragged into a battle with a legend like Nas. A rumor even spread that Cameron told Jim privately to cool it because the backlash was making him look foolish rather than powerful. But Jim pressed forward, determined to ride the viral wave as long as possible. The controversy reached such a fever pitch that mainstream news outlets, who normally ignored rap beefs, began covering it. Entertainment networks ran segments titled Jim vs. Nas, The Battle for Relevance. Radio shows debated whether Nas's silence was a sign of maturity or a missed opportunity. Academics weighed in, analyzing Billboard charts and streaming numbers, while fans pointed out that cultural impact cannot be measured in algorithms. Every angle was dissected, and the story refused to die down. It became clear this was no longer just a silly internet spat, but a scandal spiraling into a full-blown cultural debate about legacy, relevance, and the meaning of greatness in hip Hopdot, by the time a second leaked Nas verse appeared online with subtle lines that fans interpreted as directed at Jim, the energy reached its peak. People speculated that Nas was finally preparing to respond in full, while Jim continued to taunt him, daring him to step out of his comfort zone. The narrative had transformed from one man's delusional comments to a saga of suspense and anticipation, with the entire hip-hop world waiting to see if the legend would descend from the throne and deliver a finishing blow. The saga dragged into its third act, and by this point it felt less like a hip-hop debate and more like an ongoing soap opera being broadcast across every platform in real time. Jim Jones had made his claim, doubled down on it, and thrived off the outrage. But now the consequences of that bold stance were beginning to unfold in ways even he may not have fully anticipated. As the internet frenzy refused to die down, more wild stories and so-called investigative pieces surfaced, painting Jim as a man completely consumed by the need for attention. Blogs published unverified reports that government tax agencies were suddenly interested in looking into his financial dealings, given the flamboyant way he flashed hundreds of thousands of dollars on camera. One article went as far as to allege that certain nightclub owners in New York were frustrated with Jim over unpaid promotional promises, creating the picture of a man spiraling into scandal. None of this was proven, but in the court of public opinion, where speculation is fuel, these claims only added to the drama. Fans who once brushed off his comments as silly began questioning if Jim had finally bitten off more than he could chew. Anonymous sources hinted that even sponsors and business partners were reconsidering their affiliations, fearing that the constant trolling of a respected figure like Nas was backfiring. One supposed leaked memo from a marketing agency circulated online, claiming that certain endorsement deals were being quietly put on pause until the noise around Jim died down. Whether this was genuine or just another layer of internet gossip, it played perfectly into the idea that the fallout was catching up with him. The more he tried to frame the beef as clever marketing, the more people started to believe it was becoming a liability. At the same time, Nas's silence was growing louder with every day that passed. The legendary MC had not given a single interview or a direct response to Jim, but his fan base kept the fight alive with relentless energy. The leaked Raekwon verse with Nas's sly line, "If the shoe fits, this is for you," had already set the streets buzzing, and soon after, another snippet surfaced from a rumored studio session where Nas allegedly rapped about clout chasers drowning in their own noise. The authenticity of that clip was debated endlessly, but it was enough to reignite speculation that Nas was quietly preparing a response. Hip-hop blogs teased headlines suggesting that a new Ether-style diss track might be on the way, and fans clung to every rumor as though it were gospel. The anticipation itself became part of the entertainment, and Jim seemed to love the fact that his name was in the same sentence as Nas every single day. But with anticipation came backlash, and as weeks went on, the trolling of Jim only intensified. Twitter threads chronicled his career, highlighting how few solo hits he actually had compared to Nas's discography. Fans mocked him for relying on Dipset nostalgia and pointed out that Ballin', though iconic in its moment, could not be placed on the same level as songs like One Mic or The World Is Yours. A brutal meme went viral showing a scale with Illmatic on one side and Ballin' on the other side, collapsing under the weight imbalance. Even younger fans who may not have lived through Nas's prime began discovering his catalog out of curiosity, which ironically gave Nas more streams while Jim's numbers barely moved. What started as Jim claiming to be more relevant ended up shining an even brighter light on Nas's lasting impact, proving just how untouchable his legacy is. Still, Jim remained defiant. On yet another podcast appearance, he insisted that numbers do not lie and challenged the hosts to pull up his Billboard entries against Nas. He argued that relevance should be measured by who the younger generation listens to, not by what older fans celebrate. He pointed to TikTok trends and claimed his influence on fashion and street culture was unmatched. Yet the more he spoke, the less convincing he sounded because the backlash was drowning out his points. Even Fat Joe and Jadakiss, who originally sat through his claims, looked visibly stunned in clips that resurfaced, showing their reactions of disbelief. Industry veterans began speaking up subtly, defending Nas without even mentioning Jim by name. One producer tweeted that clout fades, but greatness endures. Another artist reminded fans that disrespecting legends is the quickest way to erase your own respect. As the scandal deepened, legal and financial speculation was layered onto the narrative. Some tabloids claimed investigators were looking into money laundering tied to the cash Jim flaunted. Others suggested his record label was displeased with the circus as it risked overshadowing actual music releases. Again, nothing was officially confirmed, but the pattern was clear. The internet had turned Jim's boast into a multi-dimensional spectacle where every rumor, no matter how absurd, was believable, because the foundation itself was outrageous. When you claim to be better than Nas, people will believe anything about you. The most telling moment came when Jim himself seemed to admit he might have gone too far. In an interview with Angie Martinez, he confessed that the drama had exceeded his expectations. He admitted that he underestimated the sheer force of Nas's fan base, saying he did not realize how many people would come after him with such intensity. Yet, even in that moment of humility, he could not resist spinning it as a win. He claimed, "Every negative comment was just more engagement. Every troll was just another click. And every argument was more attention leading back to his name." He portrayed himself as a mastermind, orchestrating chaos to line his pockets, bragging that he knew how to turn negatives into positives. But critics argued that what he called marketing was actually desperation, that risked destroying his credibility permanently. When the dust began to settle, the consensus was clear. Nas's legacy had only grown stronger, while Jim Jones had become a running joke across social media. The scandal did not elevate him to Nas's level, but instead cemented the massive gap between them. Fans continued to circulate old Nas verses, dissecting them for hidden shots, while Jim's attempts to bait a direct battle fell flat as Nas maintained his silence. The irony was that Jim had succeeded in going viral, but not in the way he intended. Instead of being respected as a peer to Nas, he was mocked as a man clinging to controversy to stay visible. Even those who sympathized with his argument about influence admitted he chose the wrong target and the wrong strategy. The fallout proved that not all attention is good attention, and that in hip-hop, clout chasing against legends comes with a price that can outweigh the temporary gains by the end of it all. The conversation around Jim Jones and Nas became less about whether he was better and more about what the scandal revealed about the modern state of rap culture. The obsession with virality, the blurred lines between respect and trolling, and the way social media amplifies every outrageous claim showed that hip-hop is no longer just about music, but about spectacle. Jim played his role as the provocateur, but the cost was his credibility. Nas, on the other hand, never had to lift a finger because his silence spoke louder than any verse. In the end, the world was reminded that legends are untouchable, not because of clout, but because of legacy. And that is something no amount of viral noise can ever erase. And so here we are at the end of this whirlwind saga, the scandal that started with one outrageous claim and spiraled into a full-blown cultural debate. Jim Jones may have gotten the attention he wanted, but the storm he unleashed only proved how untouchable Nas remains in the eyes of hip-hop. The question now is, what do you think? Is Jim a genius marketer who played the internet like a fiddle? Or is he simply a desperate rapper reaching for a throne he can never touch? Do you think Nas should finally break his silence and respond with a verse that shuts this down once and for all? Or is his silence the ultimate checkmate? Hip-hop has always thrived on competition, but where do we draw the line between confidence and delusion? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, because this conversation is far from over. And if you think you have seen scandals before, trust me, this one is only the beginning, because the rap world never sleeps and there is always another fire waiting to ignite. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay locked in for the next truth the industry doesn't want you to know.